Hello, everyone. Thanks for watching. I'm David Hopper, Austin Bureau Chief of 360degreesound.com. Over the last 5 years, we've been doing a series called Author Talk, in which we bring readers and viewers exclusive interviews with authors of new music-related books. Today, I'm joined by, Today I'm joined by Betsy Tontiplaphol, co-editor of the new book, The Literary Taylor Swift, Songwriting and Intertextuality. Betsy is professor of English at Trinity University in San Antonio, Texas, where she specializes in 19th century British literature. Betsy, thanks for joining 360 Degree Sound to talk about your new book,
My
The Literary
pleasure.
Taylor
I'm
Swift.
excited to be here. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, so it's available now on Bloomsbury. So, yeah, I wonder if you could please start by t telling us about how this book, The Literary Taylor Swift, came to be.
Yeah, I had sort of become increasingly interested in Taylor Swift for a variety of reasons. But when she released her album Folklore, a lot of folks who study the literature that I study, 19th century British literature, particularly romantic literature, became extra interested in Taylor Swift because she has a song on Folklore. It's actually the bonus track on the album called The Lakes, which is a reference to the Lake District in England, which is the home of, or long associated with, and was the home of some of the key figures of the British Romantic movement. In particular, a poet named William Wordsworth, whose name she puns on in the song The Lakes when she says that she's not going to let some name dropping sleaze tell her what are her words worth. Right. And so a lot of romanticists kind of picked up on that and became interested in it. And I wrote a paper about Taylor Swift's romanticism, sort of arguing that she had finally put a name to sort of some of the impulses that she'd had for quite some time. And I delivered that paper at the 19th Century Studies Association conference, which at the time was being held virtually because of the COVID pandemic. And I got a lot of good feedback on the paper, including some communications from a woman named Anastasia Klimchinskaya. We met through that conference. We started talking. She also was interested in writing about Taylor Swift. And we decided that we wanted to propose this volume, right, to give a lot of folks who are literature scholars but interested in thinking about Taylor Swift through their specialty lenses an opportunity to do so.
Mhm. Very awesome. Yeah, so the subtitle of the book is
Yeah.
Songwriting and Intertextuality. Uh,
Yeah.
for a lay audience, what is intertextuality and how does that relate to Taylor Swift?
Yeah, intertextuality is the term that we use in literary studies to describe when a work of literature, right, is deeply engaged with another text, when that other text underlies its construction, right, or defines aspects of its message, right, whether or not that text is explicitly referenced in the text in question, right? That's what we mean by intertextuality. And a lot of the essays in the book are about ways of understanding Swift's songs as having a big owing a big debt to having been profoundly influenced by works of literature, whether she explicitly acknowledges those works or not, right? And that's those are many of the kinds of arguments that our contributors are making.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's four parts to the book. The first
Yeah.
part is entitled "All the Books Beside Your Bed: Engaging the Literary Historical Canon." Speaking more to the intertextuality, what are and you referenced the bonus track from folklore, but what are maybe a few other examples of Swift, referencing and evoking the literary canon with their songs?
Yeah, there are many, right? She really crossed over to popular acclaim with Love Story, which is a kind of retelling of Romeo and Juliet. That song and other songs also refer to the term or concept of the Scarlet Letter, which is a reference to the novel by Nathaniel Hawthorne. She refers to The Great Gatsby. She refers in her most recent album, The Tortured Poets Department, in the title track to Dylan Thomas, right? A Welsh poet. And so there are many of these references. To look closely at the lyrics of her songs is to, we think, get a picture of someone who identifies as a reader, right? And then what often comes of that, especially if you're a creative person like Swift, is that you also end up identifying as a writer. And one of the things that we found really most interesting to think about, in addition to or alongside of those references to the literary canon, are all of the moments in Swift's work when she refers to the act of writing, right? To putting pen to ink, right? To writing it down, to putting it into words of her own, and you get a lot of that, right? And I think that, like I suggested, kind of goes side by side, hand in hand with her interest in maybe inscribing herself into the literary canon.
Hmm. Uh, yeah, so you contributed the chapter to the book, Baby, We're the Late Romantics, Taylor
Yeah.
Swift and the English Biedermeier.
Yeah.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about the Biedermeier period and why you chose to write about that.
Yeah, thank you. This is an essay that this is the essay that derived from that original paper that I had mentioned a while ago, that I gave at the 19th Century Studies Association conference where I first met Anastasia. The English Biedermeier period was the period in like the 18, like maybe late 20s into the 1830s, right? When Romanticism, the movement that I had been describing earlier, had become popular, right? Romanticism really began as a movement among kind of uh, young revolutionaries, right? They were politically revolutionary, culturally revolutionary, right? And they really wanted to revolutionize art. And at first, Romanticism was this kind of wild new thing, and it only took a couple of decades for Romanticism to kind of trickle down into the popular culture, where a lot of folks who weren't especially radical, or even politically progressive, had adopted some of its values and methods, right? And the term Biedermeier actually comes from a movement in Germany, right? And as I describe in the chapter, it means, it's a reference to, a kind of a kind of a culture of sort of easy, smiling, comfort and benevolence, right? With regard to certain romantic ideas, and my argument is that Swift is romantic, right? No question about that. That she embraces romanticism, the movement with a capital R, and we've got a couple other essays in the book that talk about that. But that her romanticism is a late romanticism, right? That she takes the stuff of romanticism, much like English Biedermeier poets did, and kind of reduces it to something more accessible, to something more um, available to those who aren't necessarily wholly connected with the original revolutionary impulses of the movement, if that
Hmm.
makes sense. And
Yeah, no,
I
that does.
compare in particular to one of my favorite poets, Alfred Tennyson, whom many critics describe in some ways as a kind of late romantic. And I was really struck by that term that Taylor Swift uses in her songs, in her song Late Romantics. Yeah,
Mhm.
New Romantics. Sorry. The song is New Romantics. Late Romantics is my
Mhm.
title. Yeah.
Fascinating. Yeah, the folklore album, as we mentioned
Yeah.
earlier, as well as the follow-up, Evermore, are both discussed a lot in the book.
Yeah.
Do you think those albums are perhaps the most, I guess, literary of all our albums? And also, what is it about those albums that I guess make them ripe for literary analysis?
It's such a good question. And I want to acknowledge just sort of one of the weird facets of the book's timing, which is that we had proposed the collection to Bloomsbury, right, and put out a call for essays and sorted through many wonderful proposals, not all of which we were able to include in the book. And all of that was after the release of Folklore and Evermore, right? In the time since we produced the book, it went into production. Swift released Midnights, right? And then she released The Tortured Poets Department, right? So there were these two albums. I mean, she's so prolific, right? That we we kind of did our best. I mean, we really couldn't do much with Tortured Poets because of the timing of the book's production, but that we had to sort of do our best to sort of retrofit. That I think, in other words, I think that there's probably plenty that's literary about midnights and tortured poets as well, obviously. And we just weren't able to incorporate that stuff. That said, we deal with a lot of her earlier work, but I think that the emphasis on folklore and midnights just really kind of has to do with the tenor of those albums, right? I mean, they're often described as Swift's pandemic albums, right? And there was something about that high pandemic moment, right, that sent people to a place of introspection, right? The 19th century term might have been they sent people to the closet, right, which was a word that meant study, right, the place where you would think, right? And there are 19th century, for example. We sometimes refer to closet dramas, right, that are meant to be read alone, right, rather than performed on a stage, right? They're not really conducive to performance. And although I'm not suggesting that the songs on Folklore and Evermore are not conducive to performance, obviously they've been performed and movingly in the Eras Tour, but there is a quality to them of what I think of as the closet, right? Of the study, a quiet, contemplative. Um, Vibe that I think suits the nature of literary production and consumption in a lot of
Mhm.
ways.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good point. Um, I was wondering if you had a favorite, or you may not be able to narrow it down to one, but what would be a few of your favorite Taylor Swift songs and
Oh,
you love?
yeah, no, this is something I think about all the time,
Yeah, yeah.
I'm always asking other people about as well. I love New Romantics. I already mentioned that one. I love a lot of her really poppy stuff. I love Welcome to New York. I'm a big 1989 and Lover person. Lover. I mean, maybe one of the least acclaimed, right, of her albums, but I thought it was spectacular. But probably my single favorite song is the track Invisible String, which is also a folklore track. And I love it for a lot of reasons, including the fact that it strikes me as very literary and in all of the ways that I find literature interesting. One of the things that I often remind my students is that there is a link etymologically between the words text, right? Like what we would use to describe a book, and textile, that they both come from the Greek word to craft, right? And that kind of comes up even colloquially, right? When we talk about somebody is telling a story, they're spinning a yarn, right? Or something like that, right? And I think that Invisible String kind of leans into that idea, right? That stories are built from threads, right? That connect people, places, and things in often unexpected ways. I also love to point out that weaving traditionally, historically, was women's work. And I'm really interested in Taylor Swift as a woman writer and the way in which she conceives of the delicate act of creating a narrative, right? Or creating something like a poem, which is what lyrics are, as somehow potentially tied to um, feminist history. So I love Invisible String. I mean, it's a beautiful song. The string sounds in the song are beautiful, but I love the sentiment, right? That's how our stories get made, and we don't always recognize that until after the fact.
Hmm. Yeah, great picks. So this is an academic book. I mean, it's a collection of essays by scholars. So
Yeah.
it's primarily written for academic and audience and college students. However, I think this book would be of interest to a lot of Swifties, especially those who have an interest in literature and have really poured over Swift's lyrics. So what are your thoughts as far as this book having, I guess, crossover appeal, beyond
Yeah.
academia?
Yeah, I mean that's really our hope.
Mhm.
It is an academic book, right? And I think it's time, right, in a lot of ways for Swift to be treated through various academic lenses, and indeed she is. Bloomsbury has another book out now, for example, that's about Taylor Swift and aesthetic philosophy, sort of thinking through the re-recordings project, right? Kind of asking, what are those things, right? Are they covers of self, right? How do we understand re-recordings in relationship to art? Um, that said, though, this book was written with students in mind, right? With general readers in mind. I don't think that it's jargon heavy, although it certainly talks about some complex and interesting critical literary theoretical concepts. I think it's readable, and in that sense it's sort of I think a cool introduction to the kind of work that literary studies achieves, right? Just as it's a kind of cool introduction to the literary dimensions of Swift's work, right? So I think that it can sort of function in both ways. We hope that it has some crossover appeal. We're eager for it to have that, and we'd love feedback from non-scholars, right, non-literature students who have read it.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah, I certainly found it to be, relatively accessible and yeah,
I'm so
not
glad.
yeah, not jargon heavy.
Yeah,
I'm not even super familiar with the Swift catalog, but it was
yeah,
still very readable and get
I'm so glad.
really a variety of topics too. So that was
Yeah,
cool. Yeah, I guess finally, what do you hope the readers take away from reading the literary Taylor Swift? So I mean, I guess, the
yeah,
big takeaways. So. Mm.
yeah. I think that my hope is that readers of the book who are literarily inclined, right? Come to recognize Swift for the quality artist that she is, right? I think that many of them already do. But I do think that there's a kind of an unfortunate skepticism, right, about somebody who is popular, right, who is especially popular among young women and girls, right? I think we unfortunately live in a society where that association alone can create a, a vibe that that many would regard as unserious, right? I think that's a problem, right? And I'm hoping that those who are interested in literature but maybe haven't given Swift a look because of those preconceptions will be able to start to recognize the quality of her writing as a a lyricist, as a poet. But I also kind of hope that the book, kind of as I was suggesting before, will give people the sense, will give Swifties the sense, and I count myself in that group, right? That to look at something through an academic lens um, is very often to come not only to understand it better, but to like it more, right? To love it better. And that's always been my experience with the literature that I most enjoy, that I've always loved, learning more about it, thinking more about it, wondering what others think about it, analyzing its details, thinking about it as a kind of craft, as something tied to expressive history, has always made me love that stuff more, right? And so I guess that's my hope for the Swifties who pick up the book.
Yeah. Wonderful. Yeah, thank you so much, Betsy, for joining us. And thank you everyone for watching. Make sure you pick up a copy of it, The Literary Taylor Swift. It's for sale now. It's on the Bloomsbury website and I suppose a variety of booksellers. So it should be easy to find. And yeah, stay tuned to 360degreesound.com for our Q&A article as well as our other takes on music from all angles.
Thank
Thanks
you
so
so
much,
much
guys.
for having me.
Take
I'm really
care.
grateful.
Thank you. Take care.